For 6 years, my husband Ben and I had one rule for our restoration projects: we do everything together. So when I found the false bottom in the 1920s secretary desk alone, my first instinct was to wait for him. But the faint smell of old leather and cash was too intriguing, and what I pulled out didn't just unravel a piece of history, it unraveled the man sleeping in my bed. Our garage, smelling perpetually of sawdust and varnish, was our sanctuary. It was where we, Chloe and Ben, became a single unit, breathing new life into forgotten things. I'm a graphic designer, obsessed with the clean lines of the digital world, but my true solace came from the tangible imperfections of the past. Ben, a high school history teacher, was the storyteller. He'd run his hand over a piece of warped oak and spin a tale of its imagined life, of the hands that had touched it, the secrets it had kept. We were a perfect team. He saw the history, and I saw the beauty in the details. Our latest project was our masterpiece, a mahogany secretary desk from the 1920s, elegant and imposing, with dozens of tiny drawers and pigeonholes. We'd found it at a dusty estate sale in upstate New York, and for 3 months, it had consumed our weekends. We'd stripped away layers of cracked varnish, sanded the wood until it felt like silk, and polished the original brass fittings until they gleamed. "We're not just restoring the desk, Chloe," Ben had said just last night, his arm draped around my shoulders as we admired our work. "We're preserving a story." His voice, a low, comforting rumble, was the soundtrack to my life. I loved this man with an ache that settled deep in my bones. I loved his easy laugh, the way he'd tuck a stray strand of hair behind my ear, the quiet devotion in his eyes that made me feel like the only person in the world. He was my rock, the steady hand that grounded my often chaotic artist's mind. That Tuesday, however, our sacred routine was broken. Ben had to stay late for a parent-teacher conference, a last-minute thing. "Don't you dare touch the final wax coat without me," he'd warned over the phone, his tone playful but firm. I promised I wouldn't, but the desk called to me. I was just going to give it a final dusting, I told myself, admiring the rich, reddish-brown grain under the soft glow of the garage lights. My fingers traced the intricate carvings, eventually settling on one of the small drawers, the one meant for keeping stamps and sealing wax. As I slid it out, it caught on something. Not a splinter, but a solid stop, a few inches short of its full depth. I wiggled it gently, a familiar puzzle. Sometimes these old pieces had quirks, a bit of swelling in the wood. But this felt different. It felt intentional. My heart gave a little flutter of excitement. This was the part of the restoration we both lived for, the discovery of a hidden detail, a secret left by the original craftsman. I pressed gently on the back of the drawer's housing, my fingers searching for a latch or a spring. Nothing. Then, running my hand along the bottom of the compartment, my nail snagged on a tiny, almost invisible seam in the wood. It was a false bottom. A real, honest-to-God secret compartment. My first instinct, born of 6 years of shared passion, was to slide the drawer back in and wait for Ben. This was our thing. Uncovering a secret like this was a joy to be shared, a moment to be savored together. I could already picture the look on his face, that boyish grin that always made my stomach do a little flip. But as I hesitated, a strange scent wafted up from the tiny gap I'd created. It was faint, but distinct, the dry, musty smell of old paper, the crisp scent of aged leather, and something else, something metallic and sharp. The smell of money. Curiosity, sharp and insistent, won out over loyalty. I told myself I'd just take a quick peek, just enough to be able to tease him about it when he got home. Using the delicate blade of a palette knife, I carefully pried the thin panel of wood loose. It lifted with a soft sigh, revealing a dark, rectangular cavity beneath. It wasn't a forgotten love letter or a child's lost toy. It was a tightly packed oilskin pouch, dark and heavy. My breath hitched. This was something more. This wasn't a piece of the desk's history. It felt current. The air in the garage suddenly felt cold, the familiar scent of wood stain replaced by a prickling sense of unease. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the oilskin pouch from its hiding place. It was heavier than it looked, dense and unsettlingly solid. The leather was soft and worn, secured with a simple brass buckle. For a moment, I just stared at it, resting on the workbench next to our neatly arranged tools. This felt like a violation, not just of the desk but of the rule, our rule. But the pouch was a Pandora's box, and my curiosity was too powerful a force to contain. I unfastened the buckle and opened the flap. The first thing I saw was a passport, its dark blue cover immediately recognizable. But it wasn't American. It was Canadian. I picked it up, my brow furrowed. Maybe the desk's original owner was from Canada. A plausible, simple explanation. I opened it, and the world tilted on its axis. The photo was of a man with familiar eyes, a familiar jawline, but his face was younger, leaner, his hair dark and unkempt. It was, without a shadow of a doubt, my husband, Ben. But the name printed beneath the picture wasn't Benjamin Carter. It was Daniel Rosier. The birth date was the same, but the birthplace was listed as Montreal. I sank onto the nearby stool, my legs suddenly unable to support me. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. A fake ID. Why? Was Ben in some kind of trouble? A million frantic thoughts crashed through my head, each more terrifying than the last. Maybe it was a joke, an elaborate prank. But there was nothing funny about the weight of the passport in my hand, the cold, official feel of the paper. Beneath the passport lay a thick stack of cash. Euros, I realized, crisp and unused, held together by a simple paper band. I didn't bother to count it, but it was a substantial amount. Thousands. Enough to disappear with. My breath grew shallow. This wasn't a joke. This was a go bag. A meticulously prepared escape kit. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I dug deeper into the pouch, my fingers shaking so badly I could barely grasp the contents. There was a small, sealed plastic bag containing a SIM card and a tiny, intricate key, the kind used for a storage locker or a post office box. And then, at the very bottom, I found a single piece of paper, folded into a neat, tight square. It was old, the paper yellowed and fragile at the creases. A newspaper clipping. As I carefully unfolded it, the bold headline seemed to leap off the page, searing itself into my brain. Tragedy in Oak Creek. Family of 4 found dead in apparent murder-suicide. The dateline was 20 years ago. The article detailed the horrific discovery of the Miller family, a father, a mother, and their young daughter, all deceased. The police theorized the father, a man named Richard Miller, had been responsible before taking his own right. But the part that made the blood drain from my face was the final paragraph. The sole survivor, it read, is the family's 16-year-old son, who was found by neighbors wandering down the street in a state of shock several hours later. The boy, whose name is being withheld due to his age, is now in the care of relatives. A grainy, black and white photo accompanied the article. It was a class picture of a teenage boy with dark, brooding eyes and a sullen expression. His face was thinner, his features sharper, but it was him. It was the same face from the passport. It was Daniel Rosier. It was my Ben. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Ben had told me he was an orphan. His parents, he'd said, died in a car crash when he was 16. He'd been raised by a distant, uncaring aunt who he'd cut ties with as soon as he turned 18. It was a tragic story, one that had made me love him even more, made me want to build a safe, happy world for him, to erase the pain of his past. But it was all a lie. A carefully constructed fabrication to cover up this horror. The sole, tragic survivor. My mind replayed the words. The police theorized it was a murder-suicide. But what if they were wrong? What if the survivor wasn't a victim? What if the boy who walked away from that house wasn't in shock, but was fleeing? My gaze fell back to the contents of the pouch, the fake passport, the foreign currency, the tools for a clean escape. This wasn't something you kept as a memento of a tragic past. This was something you kept in case you had to run again. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. The charming, history loving man I had married was a stranger. A liar. And maybe, just maybe, a monster. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway shattered the silence. Ben was home. I looked at the horrifying truth spread across my workbench, my hands slick with a cold sweat. There was no time to hide it, no time to pretend. The door from the house to the garage swung open, and he stood there, smiling, his briefcase in one hand. Hey, Chloe. I know I said to wait, but it smells so good in here. I figured you were putting the finish on our. His words trailed off as his eyes landed on the workbench. The smile vanished, replaced by an unnerving stillness. His gaze moved from the passport to the cash, to the newspaper clipping, and finally to my face. The warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating emptiness I had never seen before. Chloe, he said, his voice dangerously soft. What have you done? The silence in the garage was a physical presence, heavy and suffocating. Every benign object, the cans of varnish, the neatly hung tools, the half-finished rocking chair in the corner, suddenly seemed menacing. Ben hadn't moved from the doorway. He just stood there, his body perfectly still, but his eyes were scanning everything, assessing, processing. The man I knew, the warm, slightly goofy history teacher, was gone. In his place stood a stranger, a predator whose camouflage had just been stripped away. My mind was a maelstrom of fear and disbelief. I tried to speak, but my throat had closed up. I could only stare at him, my hand still resting on the yellowed newspaper clipping. Where did you find this? He asked again, his voice still quiet, but with an edge of steel that sent a shiver down my spine. He took a slow step into the garage, letting the door swing shut behind him with a soft click that sounded as final as a prison gate locking. In the desk, I stammered, my voice a pathetic whisper. The false bottom. I thought it was from the original owner. He kept walking toward me, his movements deliberate, unhurried. We do everything together, Chloe. That was the rule. He wasn't looking at me, but at the items on the workbench. He picked up the Canadian passport, flicking it open with a practiced ease that made my stomach clench. Daniel Rosier, he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. It was a chilling, humorless expression. Haven't seen this guy in a while. He was treating this like an inconvenience, like I'd stumbled upon an embarrassing diary, not evidence of a horrifying, violent past. This casual demeanor was somehow more terrifying than rage. It was the calm of someone who has absolute control. Ben, who is this? I pushed, finding a sliver of courage. What is this? The newspaper, it says the family, it says there was a survivor. He finally looked at me, and the coldness in his eyes was absolute. Tragedy sells papers. They got the story mostly right. My father was a monster. A violent, abusive drunk. My mother and sister, they lived in fear every single day. One night, he just snapped. He came after my sister. I tried to stop him. He paused, his gaze dropping to the floor. For a fleeting second, he looked like the broken boy from the article, and a wave of pity, of confusion, washed over me. There was a struggle, he continued, his voice thick with a manufactured pain. The gun went off. It was chaos, Chloe. A nightmare. When it was over, they were all gone. I ran. I was a scared kid. I thought they'd blame me, that no one would believe me. So I became someone else. I became Ben. The story was plausible. It was heartbreaking. It was exactly what I wanted to hear. But the go bag on my workbench told a different story. It spoke not of a scared kid running from a tragedy, but of a meticulous man planning for a future escape. So the passport, the money, I asked, my voice trembling. Insurance, he said smoothly, meeting my eyes again. A relic from a past I've been running from my whole life. I kept it, just in case. Old habits die hard. You have to understand, I never thought I'd have this. A life. A wife. You. He reached out, his hand gently touching my cheek. His skin was warm, familiar, but the gesture felt alien, a calculated performance. I was going to tell you one day. I swear. I was just waiting for the right time. My heart was at war with my head. I loved this man. I wanted, so desperately, to believe him. To sweep everything back into the pouch, hide it away, and pretend this night never happened. But my graphic designer's eye for detail, the one he always praised, wouldn't let me. It kept noticing the inconsistencies. The passport didn't look 20 years old. The photo was of a man in his late teens or early 20s, not a 16-year-old boy. The euros were crisp, new bills. This wasn't just a relic. It was an active plan. My gaze drifted back to the oilskin pouch, still on the workbench. Something else was inside. I hadn't pulled everything out. As if he were following my train of thought, his eyes flickered to the bag and then back to me. A subtle shift. A flicker of panic. While he was still focused on my face, spinning his web of lies, I reached into the bag. My fingers closed around another small, hard-bound booklet. I pulled it out. It was another passport. My blood ran cold when I opened it. The photo was of me. It was a picture I recognized, a candid shot Ben had taken of me last summer on our trip to the coast. I was smiling, squinting into the sun, blissfully unaware. But the name wasn't Chloe Miller. It was Sarah Rosier. I looked up at him, the passport clutched in my hand like a talisman. The air crackled with the unspoken truth. The loving husband, the tragic victim, it all dissolved, revealing the monster underneath. This wasn't just his escape plan. It was our escape plan. An escape I had never agreed to, a new life he had created for me without my knowledge or consent. He hadn't just been planning to flee again. He had been planning on taking me with him, whether I wanted to go or not. The final shred of doubt evaporated, replaced by a certainty that was as cold and hard as steel. He wasn't running from a tragic past. He was the tragic past. The caring, devoted man I'd married was a killer, and he had no intention of ever letting me go. The mask was gone. His expression hardened into something I had never seen before, a look of possessive, absolute resolve. I did all of this for us, Chloe, he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper. So we could always be safe. So we could always be together. You understand, don't you? In that moment, staring into the eyes of the man I had loved, the man who was now, unequivocally, my jailer, my world fractured into two distinct timelines. There was the life I had, the one filled with the scent of sawdust, the warmth of his hand in mine, the shared laughter over a cracked piece of veneer. And then there was the life he had planned for me, a future as Sarah Rosier, a ghost, a silent partner in his monstrous deception. The choice wasn't just about confronting him or going to the police anymore. It was about survival. He wasn't asking for my understanding, he was demanding my complicity. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that defiance was not an option. Not here. Not now. So I did the only thing I could. I acted. I let the shock and fear on my face slowly melt into a mask of dawning, tearful comprehension. I let the passport with my stolen face slip from my fingers, letting it fall to the workbench with a soft thud. I raised my eyes to his, filling them with the confusion and hurt I knew he expected to see. Ben Daniel, I let my voice break, taking a shaky step toward him. You were just a boy. You were scared. I can't imagine. I threw my arms around him, burying my face in the familiar fabric of his shirt, inhaling the scent of him one last time. It was the most difficult, most duplicitous act of my life. His body was rigid at first, a statue of coiled tension. Then, slowly, tentatively, he relaxed. His arms came around me, pulling me into a tight embrace. "It's okay, Chloe," he murmured into my hair, his voice laced with relief. "I knew you'd understand. You're the only one who ever could." He was buying it. He believed his performance had won. We stood there for a long time, locked in a grotesque parody of a loving embrace. My mind, however, was racing. Every detail of our life together was now suspect. His insistence on living in a small, out-of-the-way town, his lack of any real, long-term friends from his past, his aversion to social media. It wasn't privacy, it was operational security. The man I was holding was a master of evasion, a ghost who had perfected the art of disappearing. And he had spent 6 years training me, unknowingly, to be the perfect accomplice. We cleaned up together. He put the passports, the money, the clipping, everything back into the oilskin pouch. "We should probably get rid of this," he said, his tone casual, as if discussing old tax records. "But let's just put it somewhere safe for now. You never know." He didn't put it back in the desk. He took it upstairs, to the small safe hidden behind a false panel in our closet, the one where we kept our real passports and a few pieces of my grandmother's jewelry. My safe. My inheritance. Now a cage for his secrets. That night was the longest of my life. I lay in our bed, my back to him, feigning sleep. I could feel his eyes on me, could sense his wakefulness. He was watching me, ensuring his asset was secure. The plan began to form in the terrifying darkness, a fragile seedling of an idea. I couldn't just run. He would find me. He was meticulous. I had seen the evidence. I couldn't go to the police and just tell them my husband was the Oak Creek killer. They would need proof. The go bag was in his safe, and he would never let me near it now. But he had made one mistake. One small, arrogant error. The desk. He hadn't considered the desk itself as evidence. The next morning, I was the perfect, loving wife. I made him coffee, kissed him goodbye as he left for work, and told him I was going to spend the day putting the final touches on the desk. "Just be careful with it," he said, his eyes lingering on me for a moment too long. "It's a valuable piece." The double meaning hung in the air between us. As soon as his car was out of the driveway, I flew into action. I went to the garage, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and adrenaline. I looked at the desk, our shared project, our symbol of love. It was now my only hope. I remembered every detail of its restoration. On the underside of one of the main drawers, the one we'd had to completely rebuild, Ben had needed to use wood filler to repair a deep gouge. Before he'd filled it, I had taken a picture of the damaged wood for our restoration log, a digital scrapbook I kept on my cloud account. But what I hadn't told him was that I'd also slipped something into the gouge before he filled it. A tiny, desiccated spider we had found inside the desk, a private joke between us about the desk's first resident. He had laughed when I showed it to him. But now, I had another idea. Working with frantic precision, I carefully drilled out the wood filler. The space was small, barely a centimeter deep. I took the newspaper clipping, which I had secretly palmed last night before he'd packed the bag away, and sliced off a tiny, but crucial, piece of it. It was a fragment from the bottom corner, containing part of the newspaper's name and the date of publication. It was small enough to be easily missed, but under forensic analysis, it would be irrefutable. I placed the tiny paper fragment into the cavity where the spider had been and sealed it perfectly with a sliver of wood and a dab of stain. It was invisible. A secret within a secret. My final act was the hardest. I took my phone and sent a message to an anonymous tip line for cold cases that I'd found online. I kept it brief, devoid of emotion. "Look at the Richard Miller murder-suicide in Oak Creek from 20 years ago. The son, the lone survivor, is a furniture restorer. The proof you need is inside his latest project, a 1920 secretary desk. I didn't give a name or a location. Let them work for it. Let them connect the dots. It would give me time. I spent the rest of the day carefully packing a small bag of my own, hiding it in the trunk of my car. I took only cash I had stashed away for emergencies and a burner phone I bought from a gas station. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lawn, I walked through our house one last time. Every object, every photo, every piece of furniture we had lovingly restored was a testament to a lie. It was a mausoleum of a life that had never been real. I didn't know if my plan would work. I didn't know if the police would find the evidence or if Daniel would find me first. But as I got into my car and pulled away from the house, I didn't look back. I was no longer Chloe Carter, the loving wife, or Sarah Rosier, the unwilling accomplice. I was just a woman, driving into an unknown future, the sole survivor of a different kind of family tragedy. The road ahead was dark, but for the first time in 24 hours, I felt like I could finally breathe. Tell me, what would you have done? Would you have stayed, or would you have run? Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and give this video a like. We appreciate everyone and can't wait to bring more stories your way.